everyone, this is Ashley Tucker from My Favorite Things. I'm going to be showing you how to make a spinner shaker Christmas card today. Now this is a little bit more technical of a design. It could be a little bit more difficult, but I'm going to explain it really thoroughly. Some people might find this kind of design a little bit intimidating, but I'd encourage you to give it a try. Once you start doing it, you might realize that it's not as hard as it seems. One thing that I will say about it, though, is it doesn't take a short amount of time. This card is going to take you a little bit longer than a regular card design. This isn't a design that you're going to want to mass produce. Something that I find that makes this kind of card go a lot quicker is to really plan it out in advance. I like to sketch everything out in a sketchbook, plan out all of the different die cuts that I'm going to need, and then do all of the die cutting at the same time. Now, you might have noticed that I'm coloring right now. I don't want to get too much into the details of the coloring in this video because I think it's more important that I focus on how I created the spinner and shaker element, but I will mention that I stamped all of these images using the Extreme Black ink from MFT, which is a Copic-friendly ink, and I'm coloring these with Copics, so a Copic-friendly ink is important. I stamped them onto Neenah Classic Crest Solar White cardstock, and all of these images come from the Put the Jolly in the Holidays stamp set. Now, when it comes to the spinner shaker element, the really great thing about the technique that I used to create this is you don't need a specific special die set. You actually just need some basic circle dies. I'm going to be giving you all of the measurements for the different size circle dies that I used for my card. Now, I do know that not everybody has the same size circle dies, and the good thing about this design is you can adjust it. There is a little bit more involved if you're going to change those measurements because you have to adjust all of the measurements accordingly. So if you change one measurement of one of the circle dies, it's likely that you're going to need to change all of the measurements so that everything lines up in the end. If you do decide to change the measurements to make a different size spinner, I've done this myself. I think that the best way to do it is to use some cheap scrap paper and make all of your die cuts on that first and make sure that it all comes together and practice. Once you know that all of those measurements will work, then move on to your good paper. I do think that you shouldn't go that much smaller with the spinner on this because the smaller that you go, the less space you're going to have in the middle for the shaker. Now you could remove the shaker from the design totally and just put a circular piece of cardstock there with a sentiment on it. That is something that I've done before, but I think having the shaker makes this card just a little bit more special. I know that I'm talking a lot here and giving you a lot of information, and all you're seeing me do so far is color, so that might be a little confusing, but bear with me. I think it's important that I give you all of this information, and we will eventually start cutting out these circles. All right, so one more thing that I want to go over before we finish up the coloring here is I want to talk about the measurements of all of the circle dies that I used. I used a total of 4 different circle dies for this card. I used a 2 1/4 inch circle die, a 3 inch circle die, a 3 3/4 inch circle die, and a 4 1/2 inch circle die. All right, so here I'm finishing up the coloring, and I think that these little animals turned out so cute. I can't pick a favorite. I like the raccoon, but I also like the fox. They're all just too cute. I used the coordinating dies to cut all of those images out, and then I grabbed another die set. This one is called Sled Duo, and it cuts out 2 sled designs, and I saw these, and these are what inspired me to make a spinner card. I saw sleds, and I thought, those sleds need to be spinning. So I cut the main parts of the sleds out of some wild cherry cardstock, and then I took out some white glitter paper and I cut the tops of the sleds out of that. I thought that the glitter would be really nice on these. And then I cut the bottoms of the sleds out of some black cardstock. I ended up cutting out 2 of the parts for each of these sleds, so in the end I'm going to be able to put together a total of 4 sleds. Right here you can see that I'm using some liquid adhesive and my tweezers in order to put all of those pieces together. And for this sled, I'm going to be putting the bear inside of it. And I thought it would be cute to take some of the presents that I colored and glue them so that it kind of looks like the bear is holding them. For the next sled that I put together, I'm going to be gluing the raccoon so it looks like he's inside of that. And again, I wanted to have him holding a present, but these two presents together were a little bit too big for the sled. So I just cut the front present off and glued it so you can't even tell that I cut the present off. For the last two sleds, I'm going to be gluing the large image with all of the presents inside of them so that it looks like you have a sled full of presents. And then I'm going to take the two little owls and I'm going to glue one owl on top of each of those sleds, looking like they're kind of sitting on top of all of those presents. All right, so now we're going to start getting into creating the actual spinner. I used 2 circle dies to create this first ring out of some Neenah white cardstock. The sizes that I used of circle dies for this ring are the 3-inch circle die as well as the 4.5-inch circle die. This ring is going to be my spinner ring, so I'm going to adhere onto it everything that I want to be spinning. At first, I adhered all of the 4 sleds that I created using some liquid adhesive. Now, I was going to leave it at just these 4 sleds, but I did decide to adhere some trees to the back of the spinner. My initial idea for these trees was to adhere them to the actual background of the card behind the spinner element so that the trees didn't move and just the sleighs moved. Now, the reason that I changed it and instead adhered them to the spinner element was because I was afraid that the spinner would catch on all of these trees and it wouldn't spin as easily. One way that I could have avoided that would be to use the coordinating dies to cut into the background and then inlay all of these trees in the background. That way there wouldn't be anything sticking up that the spinner could snag on, but that would have been really, really time consuming and this card already takes a really long time to make, so I decided to just glue them onto the spinner. Once those were all adhered, I cut another ring that is exactly the same size as the first one, and I glued it onto the back so that I could have a nice smooth surface on the back. Next, I used my 3 3/4-inch circle die to cut a circle out of some light blue cardstock. This is the snow cone blue cardstock from My Favorite Things. I also cut 2 rings out of some light gray cardstock. This is the same light gray cardstock that you'll see me use later for the background of my card design. I used the 3 3/4-inch circle die as well as the 3-inch circle die to make these 2 rings. And as you can see, I stacked up both of these rings and adhered them right on top of that blue circle. I then took that whole thing and I'm going to adhere it onto my background. This background is a 6x6 square of light gray cardstock, and I'm trying to eyeball this and get it right in the center. I also kind of looked at my grid in order to place it there. It's okay if it's not totally perfect, but you do want to try to get it as close as possible. This next ring was cut using the 2 1/4-inch circle die as well as the 3 3/4-inch circle die. I used Neenah cardstock for this, and I cut another circle that just fits the back of it, and that is out of some acetate, and I glued that onto the back to be my shaker window. Right here you can see that I have some foam tape. This is doubled up foam tape so that it's twice as thick, and I'm working a strip of that all the way around the inner circle of the gray rings that I glued down earlier. You want to make sure to have no gaps in this ring of foam tape so that none of the shaker bits can escape once you close it up. For the shaker, I decided to use some small micro pearls as well as some clear sequins. At this point, I realized that I needed another layer of foam tape. Normally, when I make these cards, I just need a doubled up piece of foam tape. But for this one, because my spinner is a little bit thicker, I needed 3 layers. And that's just going to ensure that the spinner can spin really well and doesn't get stuck. All right, so I took my spinner and I placed it so that it's right around that foam tape. And then I took the window that I created for my shaker and I placed that right on top and made sure that it was nice and secure. For my sentiment, I pulled out one of the stamp sets that I've been using like crazy lately, and it only just recently came out. It's the Itty Bitty Holidays stamp set, which has all of these great holiday sentiments in it. I stamped that with Versamark ink onto the same red cardstock that I cut my sleighs out of, and I embossed it with a white embossing powder. I cut that sentiment out using one of the skinny strip dies, and then I popped it up with some foam tape underneath the shaker window. And I also popped up that little fox that I colored in. He didn't make it into one of the sleighs, but he gets to be right in the center. I made a 6x6 card base for this, and I adhered the whole thing onto that using some tape runner. And then I took a white gel pen and I went over that whole background with some polka dots to kind of make it look snowy. I've been doing this on a lot of my cards lately, and I really like the look of it. I then took the gel pen and I added tiny little rows of dots on all of the trees, so it kind of looks like they have snow on them. If you ever look at evergreen trees after freshly fallen snow, they do kind of have some snow that just sits on the edges of the branches, so that's the look that I was trying to create there. I also used the gel pen to add highlights and details to the sleighs, as well as all of the animals and presents. I think that this one little gel pen did a lot of work on this card. Gel pens are such a good thing for your finishing touches. I think that these images looked really cute before the gel pens, but something about adding that gel pen detail and highlights, it just takes it to the next level. The last thing that I did to finish up this card is I took my glitter brush and I went over the sentiment to make it nice and sparkly. And here you can see the shaker and the spinner in action. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you really enjoyed this card design and that it gave you some ideas and inspiration. If you do have any questions about this technique, please don't hesitate to ask. You can ask in the comments down below. I do try to read those, or you can reach out to me on my Instagram. I hope you have a wonderful day today, and I'll see you next time.